Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. After raising an unnervingly talented spider in secret, 12-year-old Charlotte must face the facts about her pet and fight for her family's survival when the once charming creature rapidly transforms into a giant, flesh-eating monster. Yes, folks, this is our raw reaction review for Sting. Spider movies. These we don't get very often anymore. I think for a time they were pretty popular. I mean, you can always go back to what is that 50s movie? Is it Them or was that an ant?
I
One
think
of those
I don't know if
big
that might
spider
be.
ones.
Yeah, that might be ants. I don't know 100%. But I'll tell you what, we do get a lot of Spider Men.
Yes, Spider-Men. I guess I should say we do get a lot of Spider-Men, and that's about it. I think the last really like solid big budget spider film, and I know someone's gonna correct me, might have been Eight-Legged Freaks. Was that in the theater? I was too young
I think it
for
was.
that.
David
Okay.
Arquette was having a run at that time, so I think it was in the theater because I know there are a lot of, I guess, probably B or C level
Oh, lots of those ice
of
spiders, all
yeah
kinds of
things like
stuff.
that. But we don't get to out to the theater to see a Spider movie.
No, we don't. And that's why this year is so special. I mean, not only do we have Sting, but we should probably mention that at the end of the month we have Infested. We kind of have this whole what is that Deep Impact Armageddon situation where it's just like two films that are kind of in the same wavelength coming out so close together. But yeah, no, this is super cool. We really were excited about Sting. We started talking about it on the Sunday Scaries over a year ago. We did a trailer reaction. You guys really liked that. Well Go USA, the company behind this, even really liked it. They left a little comment on our video. And that is how we got roped into getting to see a screener of this. Of course, we're going to do our best to track down all the films we want to see and the ones we think you guys will be interested in. And I got to say, this film was definitely up there for me as far as anticipation goes. And after sitting down with it, I can say this is one fun movie. Luke, what are you thinking about Sting?
I was extremely excited when we first covered this. It had those tones of just reading that little synopsis of, this could have been made in the 80s and really thrive. This could be a cult classic nowadays. So I was super excited for this one. Again, Spider movies tend to be touch and go. Most times they're misses. So I was still hesitant going into this one. I will say, as soon as we did get that trailer, it made me that much more excited for it because it actually looked like this film was really well done. And, going into this one, sitting through it, which for me was a breeze, I got to say, I was clamoring for a second round. This is an easy watch. It's a lot of fun. And hey, it'll have you wanting more.
Yeah, no, this is definitely a good 80s throwback. Like, I think when you sent me your initial thoughts on that, and you had said that before I even got a chance to see it, it was precisely my thoughts and feelings as the film was going on. This feels so 80s. This really does have the sensibilities of this family unit living in this apartment building. There's some kind of space spider, just really out there concept, and this little girl who kind of runs the show. She's kind of like this tomboy-esque kid who's collecting the spider, feeding it, befriending it, and then as the spider gets bigger, then it starts to run rampant on this apartment building during a snowstorm. I mean, all the elements are there, and I think that they execute them really well here. This was, again, I think fun is the word that I can give this. It is a really good time, just sitting down at home, but I could really see this being a good time at the theater as well, because the way they use the spider in this, I think, is really unique and smart, because for a good majority of the film, the spider, I would say, is pretty tiny. You see it in the jar; it's doing its thing. But a lot of the best elements they use it for are when you don't necessarily see the spider, but its presence is there. You're wondering, where is this thing going to come out? Now, mind you, one of the big selling points for this was that this was going to be primarily practical effects. there is a practical effect spider and it looks pretty good. I'm very happy with it. But there are also, just so everybody knows, because I feel like this kind of got lost in the sauce of a lot of the reporting, um, there are some, of course, visual effect shots, especially one sequence you see it in the trailer with the spider climbing up on the wall or the ceiling. So I don't want people going in there expecting an entirely practical effects spider.
Yeah, and going into I think it's a necessary evil in a sense to really, especially with so much movement of a spider, to do that
Mhm.
practically is such a tall task. But I will say the usage of CGI in here is very modest overall in the entirety of the film, and I do like the way that they do use it because um, now, there are some shots where it says like, a little questionable, but a lot of times it's not the main focus. Yeah, spider tends to be in the background. It's on a ceiling or something like that, and it's a little out of focus. So I think they were aware of their limitations. Kyle Roache-Turner, who directed as well as written the film, I think he had a great understanding of how to make this film look good. There's a lot of great camera work in here. A couple shots did actually impress me in here,
Oh,
which
yeah.
going into a spider horror movie, I wasn't necessarily looking for wonderful camera work, but I gotta say there are some impressive shots in here, and some of the color composition in here as well was really well done. I was really surprised about the quality of the film because sometimes these films just kind of get slapped together, but this one you could tell was really handled with care. But going back to the effects, I think they mesh them really well because, yes,
Hmm.
primarily this is practical. And I think, a lot of people will be fairly impressed with what they were able to pull off. So there is a scene in here, and I don't know if you got this. We haven't talked about it, but it was really reminiscent, almost the way that it was shot, of a xenomorph. It's
Oh,
closer
yeah.
to the
Oh, yeah.
end of the film, and I think there was like a lighting flickering and things like that. It really set the tone of this tension. And it just looks great. There are great close-up shots of the actual spider itself. I think there are a
Hmm.
couple where it's like you could easily tell it's a practical spider, but I think for me, especially when I say this is throwback to the 80s, it adds to that charm. So, I think it's going to be a plus for me on that side.
Oh, absolutely. And I only brought that up just because of the reporting that I've seen where people are really touting that it's all practical effects and stuff. And it's like you couldn't have done some of these things with the practical spider in the way that they did it. Maybe it could be a situation where it is practical, but they dolled it up with CG. I don't know. We'll have to speak with the filmmakers one day and find out. But yeah, I think that this is definitely impressive when it comes to a spider horror film. It does not pull any of its punches. There's a lot of really fun gore. There's a lot of really fun carnage and goo and webbing and all the little abilities that this little sting spider has. It's really intriguing, and I think the idea when you hear that term space spider, it almost gives you this kind of again 1950s kind of feeling where you're just like, oh, this is going to be kind of goofy, but no, it's a really deadly little creature. And there is one element to this that I was absolutely head over heels in love with, and that is this character who's kind of a scientist type in their apartment building. He gets a hold of the spider at one point. It's the character is named Eric, and he's by Danny Kim. Um, I thought that was so great. That whole sequence, once you watch it in the film, that was like the monster movie sequence that I fell in love with, was just how that all transpired. And it was just one of those things where it's like it's playing on classical tropes. It's doing it really well. It's got great effects. And again, I think that the cast here is also pretty strong. There are some standouts. I think that the little girl who plays Charlotte, I think it's Ayla Brownie. She does a great job. She's does a really solid job of grounding you to this film, and I personally think that's where a lot of the 80s-ness comes from, because this is a story told from a kid's perspective. It's not sitting here just telling you something that's like a bunch of adults having to handle a situation. Like, they're there, but it's truly her story and Sting's story.
And I don't want to get anyone's hopes up in terms of this comparison, but I will say I tend to take notes when we're watching these films just so I can kind of look back on them. And I will say at one point I did write Monster Squad vibes just because we are going
Mm-hmm.
through that lens of a child. And I don't know, I think there's some kind of risk as well as comfort in there because I think we can all resonate as being children and, looking at these random threats that we're seeing through the lens of a kid. But then I think it just adds a little bit of fun for me, and it does have that 80s reminiscent a lot of those 80s films. And I will say, this film, yes, we have this big spider, and I think it really does thrive on that concept and throwing this in the setting of this big high-rise apartment building, which I think they make great usage out of. I know when we had seen Evil Dead Rise, one of the critiques was, I wish they made a little bit better use of the actual apartment building. And I think, seeing Charlotte, which again was a great nod to Charlotte's Web, I thought, in going through this, she uses the vent system, and it's kind of like going through and kind of spying on your neighbors. I think, being a kid and getting those fun hijinks like that, it happens really early on in the film. I think it sets you into that groove to be set for a lot of fun here, and that going through and being able to kind of eavesdrop on everybody, I think was a real fun element as well. And it comes into play later on in the film, and I think they use it so wisely. But also, I wanted to bring up this unique family dynamic. It's something that is so different than what we normally see. Usually, it's a mom, a dad, and a child, but they kind of have a really different, unique relationship in here, as well as there is more to the actual family in the high-rise apartment. So I thought that was interesting. We even have a character with Alzheimer's. So it's kind of, I think they really looked at this and they wanted to create this connective tissue with the cast and the actual characters here. It just isn't a story about a spider. Yes, the spider's dropped in, but I think there's a lot of interesting elements already to this family that we do see and how this all these inner workings go. So I think that really does add to the tension, especially as we get to the close of the film. I think overall this was really well done from a spider perspective, from a storytelling, from a character. I think this was something where I was hoping for one big positive coming out of this film, but I was given a handful, and I was just absolutely excited for it.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot to love here. As far as like more or less critiques, I could give the film, I think ultimately, I don't necessarily like the way it starts out. I think that it could have went a little bit more linear. I don't want to get too much into it, but there is a section where we kind of pick up in the midst of something and then we circle back. It's fine. I don't know why. It's just one of those things that kind of bugged me, and it's
It
still
feels a
kind
little
of
out of place, I think,
it.
from
It's
as
an
you get.
odd place to drop in.
It's one of those things where you're trying to get your bearings, and I think if you
Mm,
rip that very beginning out, and I do love it because well, I wouldn't say I love it, but I think it's interesting because it kind of does introduce you to some gore effects right off the gate, right out of
it
the gate
does.
there.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily think it's needed, especially with the strong story that we do tell. And I gotta say, this has one of the funnest, probably for me, the funnest, strongest title sequence at the very beginning here with the spider. And I
I
don't want to spoil it for anyone, but it's a great visual. It's a great song. I think overall it was, again, it gets you hyped up for what you're going to be seeing.
and that was gonna be my kind of catalyst jumping off that because that is so good. That is so strong. That like literally what they jump to after that sequence, going right into that, would have just been. It's still great the way they do it, but it's like it's one of those things where it's like that is just electric. That is fun. It glides you in right away and tells you exactly what kind of a movie you're going to see. And I think the reason they may have cut the way they did was probably because they wanted to not give off the vibe of like this is kind of a goofy, fun-loving film, which it's not. It's definitely gets pretty intense.
There's some
There's
good
some stuff
kills.
in here. I do want to say there's some great kills. There is some stuff in here too involving a baby. Um, if you're a parent or a new parent, it's going to be one of those things where you're going to be like, it's going to give you anxiety. That's all I will say. And I thought it was great. I thought it was all very fun. The last member of the cast I do want to point out is, of course, Jermaine Fowler. I really loved him in The Blackening. Again, I just love this guy's charisma. I don't know what it is. Whenever he plays a character in a horror film, he is just so fun to me in this. Like he plays this exterminator as Frank. Now, is he anywhere near as good as John Goodman in Arachnophobia?
That's a tough
I
one.
can't I can't say that. But damn it, I loved Frank. I loved the little addition that they gave him with a particular weapon that he uses. I thought that was just fun as hell, and the fact that he actually gets to use it was pretty cool. And yeah, I really like how they did it. And I just think the guy has massive range. I mean, you look at the character he plays in The Blackening compared to Frank, two totally different people. I would be 100% not shocked if you were to show somebody that movie and this movie, and they'd be like, "That's not the same actor. There's no way." But I thought he was fantastic, so he's my standout in this. Yeah, Luke, I'm right there with you, man. There's a lot of parts in this to love. A couple of minor critiques, but overall, I really think that Sting is something you should go out and see. This one's going to be a recommend for me. I think that this is a lot of fun. I definitely see myself picking this up on Blu-ray. And I think if you're a creature feature fan, if you're a spider movie fan, it's been a while since we've had a real decent one. And I think this one is definitely going to cement itself in a nice third place spot for me, right behind Eight-Legged Freaks, and of course, Arachnophobia being my all-time favorite.
And I'm right there with you with the recommend. This one, I think, only minor critiques, and they all just kind of pass by the wayside because, again, I didn't know really what to expect. We get way more misses than hits with Spider films, so Sting was a pleasant surprise for me. I will say you brought up Frank. He does deliver, not verbatim, but a great offshoot of a Predator line. Which, if you see this, drop it in the comments. Let us know what that is, that you got that reference. Because, for me, it warmed my heart when we saw it. And, because it's just a quick little thing, but obviously it means so much to horror fans, sci-fi fans, everything.
I cracked a smile. I couldn't help it. I was just like, oh my god. I was
And
watching this with my wife and she didn't get the reference, but I was like, that's great.
but we know you will. So,
Mhm.
drop it in the comments. I gotta say, from a practical standpoint, the spider looked great, even when it didn't necessarily look top notch. Again, it warmed my heart for this 80s feels to it.
Yeah,
I think the cast was great, the character dynamics were phenomenal. And this film is fun loving when it wants to be, it's funny when it needs to be, and it brings the terror when it calls for it. Because there's a lot of great gore. We saw in the trailer the scene with the spider going down the throat. I mean,
oof.
gosh, even
Yeah,
even being prepped for that, and then seeing what leads up to that, and just in the aftermath, my gosh, an absolute must see of a scene. And there's a lot of kills like that in this that
yeah,
really
yeah.
bring that. So they
I'll
don't
I'll
shy
even
away from that.
say I'll even say that kill particularly isn't even the most gruesome or the my favorite in the film. I
Yep.
think that they go really hard towards this third act with some of those kills, and some of the implications and the things that they set up that could or would not happen. That it gets under your skin. If you are not a fan of spiders, which I mean I'm not, but I still love these movies. But yeah, if you have a fear of spiders, this is going to stoke that fear, no problem, no questions asked. So yeah, go in, proceed with caution on that one, but no, this is a recommend. This is fun, this is great. This thing is going to be available in select theaters on March 12th. Almost said June 12th. March 12th. So definitely go out there and see it. Thanks again to the folks over at Well Go USA for sending this over. We do appreciate the opportunity to get to see it and speak about it. And yeah, guys, I definitely think you should check out Sting. And yeah, it's going to wrap us up here. So if you're just finding the channel because you're a spider enthusiast, yes, we're going to be doing some more spider content this month. And of course, we have, like we said, that other one, Infested, coming up at the end of the month from Shudder. We've got our screener. We haven't watched it yet, but we wanted to make sure we got this one done before we sat down and got that out there. So that way, we're playing on an even playing field here. But yeah, so far, Sting, it's going to be a tough one to beat. It's a good time, very 80s. Enjoyed it a lot. Alrighty, so until next time, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.
Do the hard shit, gonna do it live, cause Splattercast kick it Every day they live.